All right, we are live. Welcome to the first panel of the day for QuaranCon 2022. We are very, very excited. Today we've got the Mature Women and Mothers in SFF panel with an awesome group of people here. So the panel today description says, mothers in SFF rarely live past the first few pages. In truth, it's an easy trope to fall into because what mother is willing to let their, or what mother is willing to let their child go off to fight the big bad? But what about the moms who fight the big bad themselves? What about the ones who are the big bad? What about older women who have no offspring, but are still the main characters of their own stories? Mothers and mature women everywhere unite. I love the description. I'm super excited for the conversation, especially with these folks. A couple of things before we get started. So first off, I want to remind everybody that we do have a free and 99-cent book sale going on. If you go to the QuaranCon website, you can find that. And second off, a reminder to everybody who is watching and to our panelists as well about the code of conduct. So you can check that out at QuaranCon2020.com/code-of-conduct. And please, if you're going to be kind of, not adhering to those rules, you will be either banned or kicked out of the video. So thank you for everybody for following those. And then the last thing to get started is introductions for the panelists. Super excited to chat with these people. So I'm going to go through just an alphabetical order. Give us your name, the genre you write in, because it's a little bit different for everybody, or I guess how we should know about you, and anything else that you'd like to share. So I'm going to kick it off over to Holly, and then I'll pass it over to Justin after that.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Holly Ash. I write science fiction. I have an underwater military series published called The Journey Missions and an eco-terrorism book called Cleansing Rain. I've been writing forever, been publishing for about 5 years. I'm an environmental engineer and I'm a mom. So I have a 3-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son.
Nice. That's almost exactly. I have a 7-year-old son and a 3-year-old daughter. So we're
it's like a good age gap.
Kindred spirits.
It is. Yeah. It's always crazy.
All right, over to Justin and then Sunyi.
Hi, I'm Justin Lee Anderson. I am the author of comedy fantasy Carpet Diem and epic fantasy The Lost War, which is book 1 in the Eden series. And I am a dad. I have 5 kids, of whom 2 are daughters.
Love it. Thank you, Justin. All right, over to Sunyi and then Victoria.
Hi, I'm Sunyi. I've written some short stories and have a novel coming out in August through Tor and Harper Voyager called The Book Eaters, which has a single mom main character. I am a single or separated mother, and both my kids are autistic, as I am. And I write predominantly contemporary fantasy with a little bit of a thriller bent to it.
Love it. And the Book Eater cover is so good, by the way.
Thank you.
It looks so good. All right, cool. Well, let's go ahead and get started then. So I guess the first question. Oh,
what
shoot.
about
Victoria.
Yeah.
Yes. I said her name already, so then I got distracted. All right, Victoria, over to you. Who are you?
Okay. Well, I'm Victoria Gross. I write YA fantasy, so it's a little bit different than everybody else here, but I'm also a blogger for Fanfi Addict, which is probably where most people know me from because my book's not out yet. But I have a stepdaughter who just turned 14 yesterday. And that is just about it.
Perfect. Thank you, Victoria, and apologies.
Oh, that's okay.
All right, so let's get kicked off with the main kind of portion of the event here. So let's kick off with the first question, which is, why are so many mothers dead? What's going on? Why are there not more dead dads? And it feels like a lot of times when the dads are dead, the mom is also dead. So it feels like if the dad's dead, they're both dead. And if the mom's dead, it doesn't mean that the dad's going to be dead. So I'll pass it over to you guys. What do you think? Why are so many mothers dead, especially in SFF?
I think it frees up complications for the character. I mean, you touched on that a bit in your introduction, but if the idea of a hero going to war, like the parents ringing them every 5 seconds, kind of, have you defeated the bad guy yet? It's so much easier, isn't it? If they don't have these connections, they don't have these ties, you don't have to wade through that. It removes a layer of complexity, and especially in sci-fi and fantasy where you're having to add in complexity with the world building, as opposed to something like contemporary fiction where you don't necessarily need to do that, then it just maybe streamlines the story, I think, for a lot of authors.
I would agree with that. And I also think losing the mom is usually a really, really great motivator to get the characters moving and gives that backstory and that kind of tragic internal battle. So I think we use the dead mom as a lot of a plot device and a motivation for character building rather than something else. The orphan trope in sci-fi fantasy, and I love it and fall into it all the time, is so strong that, you know, what better thing is there to do than go avenge your mom or live up to your mom's expectations when she's not there?
Just kind of jumping off that, because that's what I was going to say too, because I absolutely agree with you, because, you know, having a parent, you know, who was killed tragically or died tragically, even if it wasn't necessarily a tragic event in itself, I think that is a really good driving force for, like you said, internal battle. It adds a layer of conflict that may not have been there previously, I think. So yeah.
Absolutely. I've definitely seen quite a few books where the mother is just missing, just like period. Right. And so there seems to be no effect on like the protagonist's life that the mother has either died or does not exist. I mean, like, I think a prime example is Lord of the Rings, right? If you think of the Hobbits, like none of them have mothers. They're just, it's like they vanished or they died before the kid was born or something. I don't know. But it seems like there's definitely like a trope there.
Parents at all, do they?
Yeah, Tolkien's parents, they were dead, his parents. So
Yeah.
Well, and that mother-child relationship is such a complicated relationship that taking it out really frees you up to not have to deal with it. Because I think if they did have mothers, how much decision-making and how much would that play into? That would have to be such a huge part of the story that it's so often easier just to ignore it completely so you can focus on the plot that you want to tell.
I think for the characters, what the role of a mother stereotypically is the nurturing, protective role. And I think that it's so easy to go, well, what do we do with a character when they don't have that? What do we do when they're stripped away of that nurturing, protective presence in their lives? How will they cope? It's Bambi, isn't it? It's going right back to, you know, here's this wonderful relationship. The father's distant. The father is, you know, this stag, and I can't believe I've got the Bambi for a good reference to this, but here we are. Is this, you know, stag, father of the forest guy who's very distant, and that kind of plays into the trope as well of, like, you know, fathers are often distant, and, you know, they're heroic, but they're distant, they're not present. But the mother's the one who's there, and when you take the mother away, it's like opening up the child to, oh, will they survive? How will they survive? Will they become tough? And I think that's a really easy trap to fall into, really.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I was kind of researching a little bit before we got started, one of the things I saw was that they talked about how women just in general in books, especially SFF books, and probably maybe a little bit less so nowadays, but they talked about how women are often kind of playing one of two roles. They're either the goal or the obstacle, right? So the protagonist is either, you know, in love with them, trying to, you know, have them be their lover or whatever, or it's usually as the woman gets older, she becomes less of a goal and more of an obstacle, right? Kind of like the stepmother effect, where like a lot of the older women are just like trying to hold somebody back in some way. And I thought that was really interesting and kind of depressing to read about. But I'm curious if any of you have thoughts on that.
Well, that's kind of the whole reason I started writing, is I've always loved these fantasy and science fiction stories, but I couldn't find characters as a teen and a young reader that I could relate to and inspire to. So I started writing fan fiction and putting myself and putting characters I wanted to see in these stories. And it snowballed from there. And that's still kind of the approach I take when I write my books, is I'm writing for 15-year-old me. and the stories and the adventures I want to go on, and writing smart, strong, independent characters that might have a love story, or they might be the villain, but they're whole people and not a plot device.
I love that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the nature of kind of almost the question is why are we then defining the female characters through the men's storyline? And I think that's kind of what we need to get away from, is that it's, you know, each character, male or female, should have their own storyline. No character is just there to serve the storyline of somebody else. And that's just good character writing. That's just, you know, that's not even necessarily thinking about it and having to do something that's trying to be a better written piece of work. It's just, you know, that's just good writing. Each character should have their own motivations and not just be there to be, you know, the classic is, you know, the woman who's fridged to motivate the man in his storyline. It's like, if we write characters where they all have their own storyline and their own motivations, we end up with better stories.
Yeah. For those who aren't familiar, fridging is the concept of killing off like the girlfriend or the spouse to kind of initiate some adventure for the male protagonist. Any thoughts from you, Victoria? I know you read a lot, so you've probably seen a lot of these.
Yes. I do think that, you know, kind of going along with what Justin said, I do think that it is good character development to have, you know, mother characters who aren't just there for fridging purposes, I guess. I don't know if it applies for mothers like it does spouses, because today I learned a new word. But so one of the things that I do in my book, I kind of fell into the, you know, dead mom trope as well, but I have a grandmother character who is a constant source of inspiration for the main character. So even though she's not there physically, her presence is still, you know, felt throughout the book. And I think that having things like that are, you know, just as important as having someone there on the page. I think having someone for your character to look up to is also good character work, because, you know, we've all got somebody that we look up to, and we've all got somebody that we admire, and typically, you know, I won't lump everybody into one giant ball, but I think that having older characters to kind of emulate and also learn what not to do, if that makes sense, is just as important as, you know, having them there as a motivator.
Yeah. And I think
I don't know if any of that made sense.
No, yeah, definitely. I think you're totally right though, that like it's okay if, you know, if the mother's dead or if the parents are dead, like it happens in life. Like that's, I think, you know, something that we don't have to fully move away from. I think one of the things that I just would like to see more is when that has happened, show me the emotional impact of it, right? Like that affects a person's life, and to have the parents gone and have that not affect the protagonist in some, you know, real way, I think is where the shortcoming happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
I kind of fall into that trope and not at the same time, I think, because for Book Eaters, Devon she is a mom character, but she also doesn't have a connection to her mother, because in that setting, the mothers and children are separated usually. And the effect of that, one of the things I did want to look at is the fact that she doesn't have a template for parenthood with her own kids. She actually doesn't know how to be a parent. She's never seen it done effectively. And that kind of has story implications as she makes decisions often very unwisely and very unethically. And I think if you don't have these kind of figures in your life, it does have a knock-on effect where it's like you encounter that all the time in real life. You know, everyone's got different experiences of parenting and parenthood, and that changes how you are with your own kids and how you interact with them. Either you're working against that model or you're working towards that model that you've seen as a child.
You're doing it, Sunyi. You're doing exactly what I want.
Okay.
there is an impact of the loss, and
Yeah,
that's great. I love it.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say that I fully agree, because, you know, having and my train of thought just completely derailed, so we can move on.
Justin, were you going to say something?
Nope.
Great. Okay. All right. So next question here, kind of related to this. I can't remember who in our chat when we were talking earlier mentioned this, but are older women held to a different standard than older men, as we're talking about the subject of mature women? And if so, what's the difference?
I used to keep like a collection of like phrases I'd read in books that kind of annoy me, but I don't now because there's a whole men writing women's thing on Twitter that does it better. One of them was from this book by Michael Marshall Smith. I do actually like him, but he had this short story. This guy describes a woman where she's like, she's in her early 30s, so still beautiful, but before she'd begun to fade away. And it's, you know, very literally like, oh yeah, when you're in your early 30s, you start to become background, I guess. This idea, it really pissed me off when I was reading. I was like, oh, yeah. We don't become invisible, as cool as that would be as a superpower. But I've never read a book that was like, oh, he was in his early 30s and just beginning to deteriorate or whatever.
No, you're absolutely right though. There's a role change for women in a lot of fiction when they go from younger to older, whereas men, they don't have that same role transition, right? Like a man who is 16 years old can do the exact same things as the 60-year-old man in some adventure story, whereas that rarely happens. I mean, there are examples of it. Like I think Orca in John Gwynn's new series is a good example. She's a little bit older and she's a powerful woman, and so she maybe breaks that trope a little bit. But yeah, there's definitely something there.
There are some good examples, but I think, I mean, you know, the likes of Sarah Connor and Ripley, for example, are iconic examples. I recently read Bloody Rose by Nicholas Eames and the Maleficent Seven, by Karen Johnson. And those are all examples where there are older women and mothers in several of those cases who are not held to any kind of different standard, but they stand out for being unusual. And I think that's the thing, is like I can think of examples. It's like, oh, there's loads, but actually there's not. I can just think of the ones that stand out. And you're absolutely right. I was going to say men are held to a different standard. Men are just not held to the standard that women are held to. The problem is that, you know, we almost fetishize youth with women. And as you say, Sunyi, I mean, the idea that in your early 30s, like, you wouldn't describe a man like that. You wouldn't write about a man as fading. You know, he used to be handsome, but now we talk about men as, you know, becoming dignified and the whole notion of silver foxes and all this. Whereas with women, it's, you know, oh, until she was 30, she was great, but now she's not so pretty anymore. So now she's fading. You know, it's not. And then they come back around as grandmothers, which is kind of, you know, then they're the matriarch figure that's there, who is certainly not desirable, but is there for a completely different role. And in the middle, it's just transitioning. That's all that's really there. And it's just, it is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Sarah Harvey in the chat real quick, she mentioned Indiana Jones, which is such a good example, right?
Yes.
Like, I think he was like in his 30s or something when they started filming those, and then they filmed it up until he was, you know, in his 60s or maybe even older. I don't know. And the same with James Bond, kind of same idea. Yeah.
Waylander is one of my favorite books when I was kind of growing up. I know they're not like literary, it's like fantasy, but they're a lot of fun. But the character in that, he's 45 at the start of the trilogy, he's in his 60s by the end. I don't think I've ever read like a fantasy trilogy that kind of followed a woman on that arc. You know, like gray hair and everything, kind of tottering around.
Well, because men become stronger action heroes as they get older and more desirable and wise and mature. And I think we see, even just in society, women, when they hit their 30s, are expected to become mothers and homemakers and fade into the background and lift up the stories of their children and their husband. And even though we're starting to get away from that more and more, that's so embedded and ingrained in what we see in TV and what we read, that it just no one thinks to question it as often as maybe we should be, and thinking, well, why can't that woman have an identity outside of wife and mom in the kitchen? Because that's where we put them, and that's where they're safe. That's where we expect them to be.
Yeah. Have any of you read The Sword of Kaigen? Because this is like a main theme in the book, where it's this basically like this warrior woman who gets married, has kids, and she feels this. And this is like her whole like story is like she feels like she's fading into the background. And it's so well done. And then she kind of has to, break out of that in ways. And yeah, I absolutely love that.
Well, and it's very, very real. I remember just on a personal level when I decided to start taking my writing seriously, and I went and spent a Saturday at my first in-person writing conference. And even my mom and my sister and said, well, you work all week. You're missing this time with your children. How don't you feel guilty because you spent a Saturday away from your children to go learn how to write and to network and to do these things? And it took a lot to push that guilt down and said, no, I'm allowed to do something for me. And if we're struggling with that in real life, how do we expect it to manifest in the books where we're trying to challenge these things, where we write about what we know? When that's expectation from other, what I would consider strong women in my life that support me are like, but you work 5 days a week and now you're giving up your Saturday. That's supposed to be your day. You're taking care of your children and cleaning your house.
Amen.
Sorry. No, I was going to say I had a similar experience. Sorry, just that when I separated from my partner, we had the kids 50-50, and a lot of people said, would it not just be better if Sunny had them all the time, and then, their dad can go back to work full time? And we were just both like, what? Because there was no one thought to ask, oh, what do you do with your days off, or does it matter to you what you're trying to do the rest of the time? And it's just like that assumption that you've got this duty first, and that comes before everything else.
It's honestly mind-boggling that, that's just the mentality that people have. And, where I'm from, it's so much more than that. It's living in the Southern United States is like, in a lot of ways, cut off from the rest of the world, because that mentality of, women take care of the kids, stay home, fade into the background and not make a fuss about it is, pretty much the accepted role. I wasn't raised like that. And, watching it happen around me and watching it happen to people that, I grew up with and people I went to high school with is so baffling to me. Like, why can't we have both, like a man typically can, and it's insane to me.
It is. And then it makes it hard to write those characters because we don't know how to live that life, right?
Exactly.
We're still trying to figure out how to be mom, wife, and, ourselves, and adventurer and storytellers. And so we go, I think, geared towards these younger female characters because they don't have that expectation on them yet. They don't have those strings attached. So it's easier to live out that fantasy world when you're writing them, when you can take off all that pressure that you feel as an older woman or as a mother. And I think we need to change that and tell the stories of these, strong mothers that do handle it all.
Absolutely.
I think you just hit the nail on the head as to why I write YA, and now I need to do some serious self-reflection.
But I love YA fantasy and sci-fi. It's, it's great. And, I love those stories. I read those stories all the time because they're great characters in those stories, and finding yourself. And maybe that's how we stop and break this expectation, is we start with the teens and we set them up for, these experiences that they know that they're a full person and they don't have to eventually fade into the background.
I think it's also important that we stress that while having, mother character representation is important, I think just having older women representation is important, and, kind of reinforcing the fact that you don't have to be a mother to be a whole person. Because, you know, especially my generation is so very, I won't say they're, you know, really rebelling against, you know, the whole family orientation. But, you know, a lot of my friends just don't want kids. And I think that, you know, that's also something that we need more representation of, is just older women who chose not to have a family, or who made the choice to live for themselves, instead of, you know, having women who just couldn't have children, or you know, circumstance just never allowed it. I'm sorry, I didn't
No,
mean to.
it's okay. Sorry. I was just going to say that one of my favorite sci-fi books I read in the last few years was by Cameron Hurley, and it's called God's War. And the opening line is something like, "Nick sold her womb at the edge of the desert." And she's a great kind of badass older woman character who definitely does not want kids, and she has no truck with motherhood. Just as throwing that out as like a book that maybe has some of those themes for you.
That sounds awesome.
Cool. All right, we can kind of shift over here. So we talked about the kind of standards for older women. What about the motivations? Are there different motivations for older women versus younger women? And how does that look kind of like in the differences there? You touched on them a little bit. Yeah, go for it, Holly.
Okay, so I do think that there are different motivations, just because even older childless women and mothers, as you grow up, you get these life experiences and your worldview shifts. So where you get these younger teens and they're going to go out and prove themselves, I think there's a greater confidence that comes with age, and that's going to kind of change why the character's doing things. I think they have more to lose, older women, and therefore the risks and that decision to take a risk is going to be greater and could potentially have greater consequences.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone's read Children of Men, but I think there's it by P.D. James. I know there's a film. The film's like nothing like the book, but there's this bit in the book where the guy talks about how when he had a daughter, this terrible fear entered his life. And it was this all-pervasive fear that something would happen to his child. And it just kind of dictated everything. And I think like when I was reading that, because I think I was like pregnant at the time, and it didn't really make sense to me, but it does now, that when you do have kids, you gain a whole new terror of the universe at large for someone other than yourself. I think for people who are child-free and older, they have other things that they're also really invested in. But basically, yeah, the longer you live, the more stakes you've got on the planet.
I think generally, for both men and women, your motivations change as you get older. The more you experience of the world, the more your view changes. And I think, in particular in relation to this topic, I think what we maybe don't do enough is write the female characters whose motivations are not tied to their gender, whose motivations are more universal and nothing to do with them being a woman or being a mother. They just, you know, want to make the world a better place for the sake of that, or something like, you know. And I think that when you think about, you know, what would motivate an older man, you don't think about them being a man and what as a man would motivate them. And we need to think about that more universally. It's like we don't have to write a motivation that is specific to her being a woman.
Yeah, and one thing I also love, kind of on that same vein, is I love it when books, I mean, there's a place for kind of this other side, which is like the hard feminist themes. But one thing I love is when it's like more subtle, right? When it's just like, especially in SFF, where you get to create your own world. If you create a world where men and women are like very equal and there's just like pure equality, like it doesn't have to be a central theme to the story. Like you don't have to hit, you know, the nail on the head over and over and over again. Like it just is what it is. And I think that's also like a beautiful way to do it, right? It doesn't, and it kind of invites a lot more people who probably need that in their life when they're not being hit over the head with it. And so
Oh,
I always appreciate that.
absolutely. Yeah, and in my first series, my Journey Missions, it's a military series set in submarines, so underwater colonies and things like that, and it follows 2 female-led combat teams. And when I see what people think of as like the stereotypical strong female character, the warrior character, the soldier, the female leader is always the exception. They're this high ideal that nobody can reach. And what I really wanted to do kind of goes along with that is we have these female combat leaders. Nobody says a thing about them being female. It's accepted. This is, just the way it is. And the not talking about it, I think sometimes is way more powerful than actually coming straight out and addressing it.
Yeah, in the Mass Effect games, they did this for reasons of streamlining the coding and not having to put so much content in. But basically, no one ever comments on whether your character is male or female because they just didn't want to add an extra lines of dialogue. But it ends up being kind of unintentionally really progressive because it doesn't matter whether Shepard is like Jane Shepard or John Shepard. You're just playing the same story and you have the same great experience, and the character is a hero and their gender is kind of irrelevant. That's really a really cool part of that game. For anyone that's played it.
That's cool. I like that.
Kind of part of what I semi-consciously set out to do with The Lost War, because there are several main characters who are women, who are warriors, and it's just normal. But that's not one. I think the highest, I've mentioned this a few different places in a few different contexts, but the highest ranking review on my Amazon page, on the UK Amazon page, is basically somebody saying that the book is too woke because all these women can fight. And it's like, really? And it's like a lot of people have liked that review and then told me that it made them buy the book. So it's a good thing. But the very fact that somebody came out and wrote a review and was like, women can fight, it's ridiculous, it's too BBC for my taste, is like, come on, really?
With all of like the weird magical things happening in that book,
the most unbelievable
they're
thing
totally
was that
they're
women
totally
could be
okay with
warriors.
that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or have
Totally
boxing.
okay. Totally okay with the guy throwing fire from his hands, but the women being able to wield a sword is ridiculous.
Unrealistic.
Completely nonsense.
I had a similar review on my military series where someone told me that I clearly don't know what a life of action leads because the female characters or the main characters are female instead of male, and that's not what a person of action looks like.
And it's just so pervasive. It's just annoyingly pervasive.
There's a scene in my second book, Stones of Light, where the main character is basically like in this like gladiator kind of situation where he's like fighting people, and then he gets to the point where like he's about to die, and his mother shows up and saves him. And there was a friend of mine who hated it, and he's like, dude, you can't have his mom saving him, like that's so dumb, what the heck. And I like pushed back. I was like, dude, this is the best scene in the whole book. It's like it's staying, and people love that scene. And so I was like, there are people who are not gonna like when you allow these older women to have their moment to shine and be the protector, and that's okay. They need to read it too. They need to get used to it. So
that's it. I suppose it's a self-perpetuating myth, isn't it? Because the less it's written about, the more people just assume it can't possibly be a real thing.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So why, and from like the societal perspective, why do you think it's so hard for society in general? I mean, maybe aside from us, because we obviously we're in this panel, we care about this topic. Maybe it's easier for us, but society at large, why is it so hard for them to tell stories about older women?
I think there's a baseline assumption that a lot of women's experiences are not very interesting or important. I hope that doesn't sound harsh, but that's, I don't know, there's a sense that the work you do at home is less important than the work you do outside, which I didn't ever feel to be true. I always felt like my first office job outside uni, I thought this is just a waste of everybody's time. And I never felt that with kids. It's like you're kind of doing something that has an immediate effect. But there is an assumption that I guess they either don't have an interesting perspective, or they don't have anything to contribute to a story, or they don't have a story that's worth telling.
I think that's really true. Oh, go ahead, Victoria.
Sorry. In that same vein, I think that older women are, and this also might sound a little harsh, but I think they're more easily forgettable. That was all that I had. Sorry.
No, and along the same lines, I think it's because we do push older women to the background, and we as a society say, as you age, your role is now to lift up those around you, your children, and that's your main purpose. So we take identity away from women as they age, and they just become there to support and help the next generation, not so much that they have their own purpose and goals outside of that. And that's how we see these older women and mothers, even childless women. They're the fun aunt. They're the ones, that are there to support their nieces and nephews or this younger generation. They're the mentors. They're not the main character. They're always the side character in life. So I think we need to change that. And it's a struggle in real life. So I understand why it's a struggle in books to give women in this age category a purpose outside of that nurturing mentor mother role.
Yes, I love that idea too of like, and it's one of my favorite things that books do is you take like a familiar story and then you tell it from the point of view of some other character, right? Rather than like the main character. And like you're talking about like the fun aunt, hearing the story from the fun aunt's perspective, like that would be a great book. And yet we usually focus on like the traditional protagonist kind of trope. Yeah.
I mean, I love this film. I know the actress in controversy now, but I really remember watching American Beauty when I was younger and really liking it. But now that I'm older, I think back on it, it's like, how different would that film have been if it'd been about his wife? Because I don't think I've seen a midlife crisis film about women. They probably exist, but they're maybe not as highly billed.
Are we allowed to have midlife crises as
That's
women?
exactly what I was going to say. You're not allowed to. You have to be the stable mother, right? Like you're not allowed to have any issues of your own.
That's our thing. We're the ones who fetishize our own youth as well as yours, so you don't get those.
Okay.
Listen, if that's the case, God help my kids.
This whole notion is kind of put me in mind instantly of I don't know if any of you watched The Walking Dead, but Carol in The Walking Dead is a brilliant character who has had a brilliant story arc over the 10 years of the series. And I love where she is now, where she's gone from a mother who was a victim of domestic abuse through so many ups and downs to she's now in a position where she plays on the fact that she is constantly written off as an older woman, as not a threat, and she plays into that role where people underestimate her, and she uses that against them, and she wields this kind of great power. She's an absolute badass. There was a whole, I don't want to spoil anything, but there was a whole storyline where basically she saved everybody, and it was brilliant. And I love her character for that, for representing this older woman who just keeps coming out on top and keeps surprising people and keeps being the strong one. And often she's the strong one by doing things that we wouldn't consider strong. Like she's now, there's a lot of political manipulation going on and stuff, and she's playing mind games, and she's such a strong character, but not in a way of, necessarily the what we would traditionally call a strong character. And I think she's a brilliant example of exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about.
I love the kindergarten teacher as well, who became president in Battlestar Galactica. And I think that was a kind of theme for her all the time, where people were like, you're just a teacher. And she was like, yeah, I'm used to managing immature people all day long. And she was there for it. And she was really, really good throughout the whole show.
Well, I think as writers, we talk so much about tropes and how do we want to avoid them and spin them so they're unique. And there's this huge untapped potential here with mothers and older characters, and looking at their motivation and like, what would a mother do to protect her child, and what lengths would she go to? And could you take that to the extreme and make it the protagonist? Or, I mean, the antagonist? And would you, like, I have a character in my eco-terrorism novel who wants to make a better world for her children and her grandchildren. And the only way she can think to do that is mass genocide to restore balance between human and nature. And that's her motivation, is still her children. But you can warp that, and there's so much to play with there. Or you can make it the hero and be on the sacrifice, and I'm going to go on the quest so you don't have to. And what are you going to do? And I mean, if we're looking for unique arcs to tell, there's so much potential with these type of characters that no one's told these stories yet.
Yeah, I hope our protagonists will get along if they ever met in some alternate universe. So in the Book Eaters, Devon's son has a condition where basically he consumes human minds, and he's affected by what he consumes, which means his mother goes out hunting to keep him alive or he'll starve. And she finds good people so that he's not been influenced by the personalities of like kind of bad people. And it's just, but the whole novel is structured around, she does lots of terrible things with this good motivation and best of intentions, but are they ethical and are they kind of fair? And because I think that's stronger than morality for most of us. You know, if we're in a life or death situation, if we're picking between like our kids' lives or someone else's, you don't stop and think about whether it's right or wrong. You just choose, and you just, that's very a very strong emotion. It's very hard to motivation that's hard to ignore.
It is, and it's more fun to play with than the "I'm going to die to save you" motivation that we often see of mothers. Is that self-sacrifice, which, yes, that can be very powerful, and a mother would do that no problem. But I think there's more to play with if you keep her alive and you use that kind of warped motivation and morality to protect and save her children.
Sacrificing your own morality is a lot harder and a lot more interesting to kind of delve into from the mental perspective than self-sacrifice. I think that's really cool. I want to read your book now. Shoot.
I can say that Justin loved it. My husband, he absolutely loved Book Eaters. So
thank you.
Oh, that's awesome. As a reminder to the people in the chat who are watching, if you do have questions, now is kind of the time to ask them. We're going to be kind of wrapping up in probably about 6 or 7 minutes and moving on to like the final section. So if you do have questions, now's the time to ask, and we'll kind of go from there. So, oh, and it looks like we did get a question, so I'll read that out. It was looks like it was from Aylin. So if a character still wants a traditional marriage/family, but all that's actually tied to her greater desire for power and influence, would you say that it's still going against the norm?
I think so. I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to have that traditional family and mother role. And I think we need to be very careful in saying, you know, it's wrong to want to stay home and just take care of your kids. It's wrong if you want that to be your identity, because there's not. That's great also. But I think you just have to be careful that you don't fall into that's all their personality is. And that's all that they are. They have to have inner desires and hopes beyond taking care of and raising a family, I think. So absolutely, I think it would be against the norm. You would just have to be careful how you do it, not to fall back into those stereotypes of how we see moms and wives and homemakers and things like that.
I think there are plenty of examples actually where the male characters or men characters also want to just settle down and like have their girlfriend and their family, and that's pretty common for them. I don't see why it can't also be a strong motivation for mother characters and women characters. You know, they can both want those things. It's just what they're allowed to do around the edges of that.
Yeah, I almost feel like it is like more against the norm, because the norm is going to be one or the other, right? You're either, you know, have these great aspirations for power and influence, or you want like a traditional marriage and family. So the fact that somebody wants both of those, I think, is really interesting and would create a really interesting dynamic within the character.
There's a character that came to mind as soon as I read that, but you've got to take the incest out of the equation, is Cersei Lannister. Yeah, and I say you've got to take the incident out of the equation like that's incidental to her storyline. Obviously it isn't, but I mean, there you go. There's a character who is driven by the accumulation of power, but also, you know, tries in many ways to get it through her children, through marriage, through her children, for her kind of dynasty. So, you know, that storyline is absolutely there to be told, and I don't think anybody would call Cersei a weak or a tropey kind of character, or her character arc.
No, definitely not.
And I think this kind of goes to, we don't make men character choose one or the other. We always make female characters choose one or the other. You can be strong and feminine. You can be a fighter and a mom. You don't have to choose. And I think that's that expectation we need to take off of our female characters, and maybe ourselves, is that you can only be one thing.
Well, and also, you don't have to be a fighter to be a strong female character, right?
No.
Not every woman has to be Katniss Everdeen, even if it feels like a lot of the strong female characters are kind of put into that role.
I love that you
inner
said that,
strength.
Holly. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just say that inner strength is sometimes more powerful than the physical strength. I try to write characters. I have a scientist who's my main character in my eco-terrorism story, and she's scared a lot of the book, and she shows that, and that's okay. And that doesn't make her any less strong than, you know, my military fighter characters that fall more into that stereotypical side.
Yeah, I've just been reading an arc actually of The Surviving Sky by Kritika Rao, and that's got a married couple in it, and it, you know, it's like a science fantasy, and it's told from the different points of view. And you know, the man is like a higher caste and he's got magic, and the woman is lower caste and doesn't have magic, and they both have like very equal motivations. They come out from different places, and they both have just a lot of mix and nuanced features. And I thought that was a really good approach just for some of those topics. For just, you can have them. I'm not conveying this well, sorry. When those two perspectives were side by side, I found that really interesting, because I've not seen a lot of that before either, as couples together in books.
I was just going to say, I'm really glad you said what you said about like the female characters can be warriors and be feminine, because there's a scene in The Lost War that I wrote for exactly that purpose, but I was really nervous about having it in. So what happens is that there's my two older sort of badass warrior women take a younger warrior woman shopping for clothes. And I actually had to run this by a friend of mine who's a writer, and I was like, listen, can I do this? Can I have these sort of badass warriors take this younger one clothes shopping? Because the whole point of it was, A, they were developing a kind of you know, maternal role towards her, but B, I wanted them to be both feminine and she was like, absolutely, yes, do that. And I have had a couple of people be like, why is this scene here? And it's like, that's why it's there. That's exactly why it's there.
I love that scene, by the way. That was a great scene.
I do too. It's one of my favorite scenes. Then I wrote it, but yeah, there have been people like, why have you written this scene? And it's like, because they can be more than one thing.
Love it. This is a good transition. So I think we're going to start transitioning to the last section. And what I wanted to do is I want to hear from each of you as authors. And so we've got about 10 or 11 minutes left, which means we've got about 2 minutes each for everybody. I want to hear about your favorite mature woman or mother character, or one or two, in your own books, and what you've loved kind of writing about them. So I'm going to go from the alphabetical order again. So it's going to start with Holly, and then go over to Justin, Sunyi, and then Victoria, and then go from there.
Okay, so in my books, in my eco-terrorism novel Cleansing Rain, I have a side character who is the mother of one of the main characters. The story is told from dual point of view of an engaged couple, a scientist and her fiance. And this mom, she spends a lot of time in the background until the end, where it's revealed she's been kind of pulling the strings all along. And she does have that kind of warped morality that we talked about on wanting to make the world better for her children, by going to these extreme lengths. And what does she see from the point of environmental justice and, you know, humans versus nature kind of thing. So she was really interesting to write, and to find that balance of, she's portraying a lot of that stereotypical mother, grandmother role, but in the background, she's the mastermind of it all, and trying to play with that balance. It was really fun to get to subvert a lot of those expectations when it's revealed in the end. And I just finished, I'm line editing the sequel to it now, where she's out in the open and she's making all of her moves and leaning into this antagonist role. It's been really fun to find the motivation from that mother role and warp it to that kind of extreme. So that's been a lot of fun to play with.
I love that. That sounds awesome. That's cool. All right, passing over to Justin.
I think that, so there's a lot of mature female characters in The Lost War, but actually I think if we're talking about my favorite, I'm probably going to go back to my first book, Carpe Diem, and Great Aunt Harriet. She was kind of partially inspired by, I love the phrase that I read somewhere, inside every older person is an 18-year-old wondering what the fuck happened. And that's kind of where Harriet was written from. So she's an 80-year-old kind of hard drinking, hard speaking, debauched Scottish woman who, as it's a mild spoiler, but not really, as part of the storyline, along with her nephew, is physically returned to her 20s and continues to be hard drinking, debauched, swearing. And a lot of my intention with that was kind of going, you see this 80-year-old woman here, but she's this person too. She's just physically older, but she's still this same heart. You know, she'd never had family because that was the life she wanted. And she's a great character to write because she says what you're not supposed to say. And she just, you know, she's one of these people who says awful things and everybody goes, oh, and she's like, get over it. And she was a lot of fun to write. And I've been told by quite a lot of people, particularly I've been told by a lot of older women that she is their favorite character in the book, and they loved her. So I was really pleased that she came across as such a popular character.
I love that. That sounds awesome. All right, over to Sunyi.
So I've only got the one book coming out. I'm not going to count things that are trunked because they're not fit for man or beast to read. And yeah, that's got Devon from the Book Eaters, and she is a 30-year-old single mother. She's been through 2 arranged marriages, already lost 1 child to her society's kind of system, and she's on the run at the start of the book with her youngest son, who is almost kind of not a vampire. And I guess what I most enjoyed about Devon is that I felt like I had freedom in making her not good. She's not a good person. She's at best grey, quite often evil, quite often unethical. But I hope relatable still, that she has relatable motivations, and I guess there's this sense that life kind of grinds you down as you get older. You know, you start off idealistic, you start off with all these ideas about yourself and where you want to go and be, and you just become someone you don't recognize as you age. That seems to happen to a lot of people I know. Happens to me a little bit, I think. You know, you grow up to be all those boring adults you didn't like when you were a kid. And yeah, I've been told by my grandmother the book's too gruesome to finish, so I think that's a really good recommendation.
Cool.
It reminds me of Dexter in a way. I don't know if you ever watched
Dexter was a big inspiration. Yeah,
was
she's
it?
a bit
With like
Dexterish.
the father influence on Dexter when he was young, kind of thing. Yeah, really cool.
Yeah, I
That's
love
how
that
I've seen
show.
it.
Anyway.
Cool. All right, love it. All right, over to Victoria.
Well, the only thing that I have to reference is my book that's not out yet, and it's a YA. So, like I said earlier, I do have the protagonist's grandmother who, while she isn't, you know, an active character, she's still a big source of inspiration for my protagonist. She's my protagonist's namesake. And you know, she finds journals that were left by her grandmother, and she doesn't initially realize that she's her grandmother. So, you know, for her, it's just this woman that she can look up to and that, you know, she can emulate and have, you know, reserves of strength like like that. And unfortunately, that's really all I have by way of mature women characters. But this has definitely made me want to explore that more, especially since I'm getting closer to 30 and gonna fade away in the next couple of years. So
well, we look forward to next year at QuaranCon, reading the book and hearing more about it, and that'll be fun. So for my own, I have a lot of women characters in my books. Actually, I went and looked through. It's equal 50-50 for the speaking parts for men and women, and it's a very wide range from like young women to there's like a council of older women who run a secret village. And I feel bad for my narrator sometimes because he's just like he's a man with like a really like deep like manly voice, and he has to do like all of these older women characters, and he does a great job of it. But I think my two favorite characters are, so the first protagonist that gets introduced is this character Chris, and his mother and his wife are central throughout the entire story. And in the first book, his wife has a child, and his wife is also a warrior just like he is, and she gets like some POV chapters. In the second book, she has a chapter where she's struggling with postpartum depression. It's not like labeled as such, but she's having a conversation with another woman about how she's just not sure if being a mother is for her. And it was a really fun and kind of interesting chapter to write as a man. I had to run the chapter by my wife after I wrote it, and she liked it. And then the protagonist's mother character as well is kind of there throughout both the first and second book, and plays a key role in the third book as well that I'm working on, which has been really fun because she's older, she's not married, and she is like specifically like not had any like love interests in the past 30 years, like for reasons. And yeah, she's strong in her own way. She's not a fighter, but she's willing to fight for the things that she cares about, and kind of like that protective mother role, which is fun as well. So, all right, we are just about out of time, so I'm gonna go ahead and start wrapping up. I do want to first kind of thank everybody in the audience for coming. This was a lot of fun. I had a great time chatting with the panelists. Seeing the comments as they're rolling through is awesome as well. Especially seeing which kind of comments that we're saying resonate with you all has been awesome. So thank you for coming. And then again, I'll also thank you to the panelists. It was a great conversation. This was a topic that I was really excited to hear about from you all. I know when I first reached out to you, I was like, hey, I know I'm a man. It feels weird being a moderator for this panel about mature women and mothers. If any of you want to moderate it, let me know, please. So thanks for letting me do this, and for being willing to participate. I think it was a great conversation. After this, in about a half hour, the next panel coming up is about location as a character, which I think sounds like a really cool topic. So if anybody in the audience or the panelists want to stick around and watch that, it'll be moderated by Neil Williamson. And the panelists will be Gabriella Houston, Patrick Samfire, Anna Smith-Spark, and AF Stewart. So it should be a great conversation there as well, again, starting in about a half hour. And then once again, a final reminder that we do have the book sale going on. So there are a bunch of free and 99-cent books. If you go to the QuaranCon site, you can check that out. And again, thank you all. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and having everybody there in the audience with us as well live. So thank you. And I think we're going to be signing off right about now. So thank you all.
Thank you.